The views and opinions expressed on Unlock Your Wealth Radio are those of the host, guests, and callers only and are not necessarily the views of Unlock Your Wealth Radio, Heather Wagenhals, or Success Publishing International.
More willpower than a barefoot woman at a shoe sale. Able to stretch a single paycheck for an entire month. Makes money concepts easier than third grade math. Introducing your purveyor of prosperity, Heather Wagenhals.
Work all day, stress all night. Take your mind off your money and focus on your life. Money don't matter or the stuff it bought. It's the way you think, not what you've got.
Yeah, Unlock Your Wealth Radio starts now. Get your money mind right.
Yeah.
Yes. Welcome to Unlock Your Wealth Radio. This segment is sponsored in part by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at unlockyourwealthradio.com/free book and click on the link to over 150,000 titles to choose from your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad to have you. I'm your purveyor of prosperity, Heather Wagenhals, and I am flanked by my producer extraordinaire, the maestro of moolah himself, Michael Terry.
Hey.
And we are going to help you get your money mind right on today's show with the following great features. So first off, we have a really cool securities related, and not in the personal protection realm, but in the investment realm, moolah word of the day, as well as a killer guest, a returning guest, no less, Christopher Dukes, who's also been on this show. And we're going to talk about marriage and your money.
Nice.
And specifically, we'll address relationships and maybe talk about some do's and don'ts when it comes to marriage and money.
Yeah, plenty of them.
Exactly, because the number one cause for divorce is what?
Is money.
And so we don't want that to be a problem. Plus, what is this week's key, my friend?
Become a voracious reader.
Yes, we are at the final key in our Keys to Riches financial philosophy, and which means that we are wrapping up a season today.
Another one, yep.
It's unbelievable. We're all done. So for those of you who are looking forward to the key, well, it still exists, but in a way better format. Why? Because it's its own show now.
Well, it's called the Keys to Riches Show.
And the Keys to Riches, powered by Unlock Your Wealth Radio, can be found on our Libsyn channel, on our iTunes channel, but also at its very own website, keys2riches.com. And so stop over there so you can learn all about today's key, which is to become a voracious reader. And it's a critical key. And I'll share with you some of my wisdom and all of the brain research that kind of supports why reading is so critical to your personal, professional, and most importantly, financial success.
Yeah.
Yes. So that'll be great. But first, how about our moolah word of the day?
Moolah word.
So
bring it on.
Today's moolah word has to do with securities. And the word is unlisted.
Oh.
Like your phone number?
Unlisted.
Kind of, sort of. Like you have one?
I've never heard this word used in finance.
Well, you're going to when you get our friends and family offering. Because you will have the potential to be an owner of this unlisted security. So an unlisted security is a security which is not traded on an exchange. So it is usually due to an inability to meet listing requirements, or it hasn't gone, quote, public yet. So things can be delisted depending on what's going on with the company and the value of the shares, yada, yada. But for such securities, broker-dealers negotiate directly with one another over computer networks and by phone, and their activities are monitored. They're still monitored by the NASD, which is the National Association of Securities, if I enunciate properly, dealers.
Yeah.
OTC stocks or over-the-counter stocks are usually very risky since they are the stocks that are not considered large or stable enough to trade on a major exchange. So this can be new stocks in addition, to existing stocks that have gone public. They also tend to trade infrequently, making the bid-ask spread larger. Also, research about these stocks is more difficult to obtain.
So where would you research them?
on the internet.
Yeah.
And you can always go, any stock that's publicly traded has to file. And so you can go to the SEC to read up on the specific companies and look up all of their financials because they have to do quarterlies. And so you can review their quarterly financial statements. Plus, you'll also see information about them in the press. So these are really good. So let's say, I'm trying to think of there's no real easy example other than the ones, but let's say, your company had to go into like a bankruptcy reorganization and you had people that held a big short position and it drove the price of your securities down so that either there wasn't a lot of trading volume or the price of it was so cheap that it couldn't hold it onto one of the other exchanges. And so it kind of falls off. But that doesn't mean that the company is bad or worthless. It just means that there's not a whole lot of activity in it. And so if they're reorganizing, for example, let's say they're changing out their management, they're changing out who knows whatever, they're fixing whatever the problems are, they can do this. And so you could find potentially good buys in the over-the-counter markets if the fundamentals are solid and the company just had a hiccup due to something. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad company. Is it riskier? Is it a little bit more speculative? Perhaps, because what if they can't overcome their challenges? But the opportunity or the upside is also pretty huge too if they can recover. It's not what you want your big financial game plan is, but it's something that you could dabble in with some recreational investment funds.
Yeah.
So we can think of it that way. I am so excited about this week's guest because he is a returning guest. So Christopher Dukes is going to be joining us today. And as a returning guest, we had an amazing conversation the last time he was here. And we're going to continue talking about money and relationships because I mentioned at the beginning of this show how divorce is the leading cause of divorce is money. And I would go one step further and I would say that the inability to communicate or negotiate or agree on money tactics would probably be it. And we can talk with our guests on that. But I think that some of the things that keep us from being wealthy are pre-programming, as we always talk about here. And so what our mindsets were established as young kids with money, and then being in our financial habits that are ingrained for so many years that that we can't go from being single to being married successfully.
Yeah.
So there's a bridge there that we're having trouble crossing. And so our returning guest, Christopher Dukes, is going to be joining us, and he's going to help us cross that bridge, if you will. So Christopher Dukes, for those of you who are just experiencing him for the first time, is the president and owner of Dukes Wealth Management Incorporated. It is a DBA, Dukes Financial and Insurance Services. And he is a broker. He's licensed in California and several other states, so you need to check to see if he's available to do business in your state. But he's all over the place. He's been conducting financial seminars and giving complimentary consultations for the last 8 years. So even if you don't live in a state, you could still pick his brain for free. Isn't that cool? So I think that that's awesome. So help me welcome Christopher Dukes to the show. Christopher, thanks so much for being a part of Unlock Your Wealth Radio yet again.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So as I'm thinking about our last interview and kind of one of the things that I don't think gets spoken about enough when we talk about money management, especially familial management, and when we deal with couples, is how divergent individuals in a relationship can be when it comes to money management. How important is that, would you say?
Really, really important. It's for years, and I've been doing what I do since 2003. It's about 13 years now, and it didn't take me long to realize that the financial health and emotional health of couples and clients are absolutely 100% linked. what I've said to clients over the years is there are certain things that you need to do, certain concepts and certain tenets that you need to set up, financially between the two of you to make sure that emotionally, you keep your sanity and most importantly, your marriage intact.
Yeah, and then, and the number one reason for divorce is finances. So I think that it's a critical piece of the puzzle. So, is it possible to have a saver and a spender live happily ever after?
That's a good question. The answer is possibly. It's really about the communication. When I've got a couple that's one's a saver, one's a spender, the first thing I'll tell them is, look, you've got to find a place to talk about money. You almost have to schedule it. Where you'd kind of say, hey, tonight after the kids are in bed or after dinner, we're going to talk about, some money matters. I mean, just like you'd schedule, a date, or you'd schedule something to that effect. And a lot of couples I've consulted, basically kind of say, look, we want to set a limit. We want to set a limit that is what we sort of utilize as the limit that we talk about. So, for example, if it's under $250, just for example, maybe that doesn't warrant a conversation. But if it's $250 or over for my spender, then the spender needs to talk to the saver and say, hey, we've got a pretty big issue coming up, and I want to be sure that we're both on the same page. And obviously we can think of better ways to spend our time, but as you said, the marriage is certainly will be stronger, and divorce a lot less likely if we just have people talk and communicate, especially when one is a saver and one is a spender.
What happens when you get two savers together? Do they ever experience an enjoyable life, or does the rainy day never come? I mean, I'm always curious because I don't interact with clients that way anymore. I'm more on the coaching side now, and I don't deal with the day-to-day investments with folks. But what happens when two savers get together?
It's interesting because, with the investments that I handle, there's only one of two things you can do. You can either save it or spend it. You can either reinvest your dividend or you can take your dividend. And that's the only thing you can do. So when two of the people are savers, we just kind of go, okay, you guys, you still need to experience life. You still need to, be able to, get together and say, hey, we've got all this money sitting here. Let's find something to do with it. What I've seen historically is that the savers' marriage remains intact more often than not because they're on the same, sort of wavelength. But it is like pulling teeth, to coin a phrase, to get them to spend. And, life is about experiences, and I try to, much like you coach your clients, I'll just try and guide them and say, hey, you've got all this money sitting here for a reason. You're going to leave your kids wealthy enough. Let's maybe utilize some of this and experience some life. And, a lot of the clients that are savers are older, and may have gone through, we're sort of saw some clients that remember, the Depression when they were very, very little. They remember, how they had to sort of skimp and what things were like. And, when that shapes your values as a child, it's very hard to let go of that, even in your, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Oh, I know, it's ingratiated. My mother was born in the 30s, and let me just tell you, she's always got at least 6 months worth of canned goods in the house at any given time. We had a deep freezer too. We had, for extra, stockpiled meats and all kind of frozen things, because, and I'm like, hey, guess what? World War II's over. In case you didn't get the memo.
Right, yeah. Over for a bit. Well, and your case in point there, that just lets you know that those habits, they stay with them. And I do see that quite a bit. The savers are great for me as a financial advisor because their statements look wonderful.
Yes, funds under management. Who could argue that?
There you go. Ultimately, we'd like people, I'm at a different point in my career now and a different point in life where we'd certainly like people to, reap the fruits of their labor and go out and enjoy.
Absolutely. You You are listening to Christopher Dukes on Unlock Your Wealth Radio. This segment is sponsored in part by KeepMyID.org, the only service that actually prevents identity theft. All others are just monitoring services. Put your credit on lockdown for their special offer for Unlock Your Wealth Radio listeners by visiting our website at unlockyourwealthradio.com/keepmyid and click on the link to protect your financial identity right now. Remember to use promo code WAGS. So what are some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to effective relationship money management?
Yes. So there's a bunch of them, and these are, sort of do's and don'ts that we have cultivated over time and just kind of seen what clients do and sort of, what works and what doesn't work. So the first don't, I guess, is what I call you can't buy love. And this came from a client.
There's a song about that, isn't there?
Money can't buy you love.
There is.
I had to go to our resident moolah song expert here.
That title has been misquoted many times.
Many, many times it has. Well, it's the idea has been around forever, but it still resonates. And what we see is one. I have to use, of course, examples, but the one couple I had, every time they get in an argument, the husband would go out and buy his wife something, some bling or some sort of
an apology gift,
nice thing to sort of make up. Exactly. Well, it ended up having the opposite effect because now she'd go, so if I get into an argument, he comes home with jewelry. Great.
I'm going to pick a fight once a week.
Exactly. So totally backfired, made the marriage more difficult. And then the studies, of course, if you go online, studies suggest that couples who are better off financially, but who have a strong passion for what the money represents, they actually have a bigger source of conflict. If they got a lot of money, but they want, one wants a new car and one wants, jewelry, there's an issue. What we sort of encourage is you spend money more on remembrances, vacations, not on stuff, but on on experiences, and ultimately from all the clients I've had in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who were saying, hey Chris, I wish I would have done more of this and more of that. It was never a question of what they did. They were happy about that. It was all the things they didn't do. All the experiences that they didn't sort of get to experience. And so we've seen that quite a bit on the don't side as far as making sure that use an argument as a way of getting more bling. You
just gave our audience members a whole new idea, though. They're like, I hadn't thought about that. Argue for the apology gift. Yay! So
exactly.
I agree with you with the whole remembrances things, because I look back, especially in my second marriage, my do-over, if you will. Because my first one I was just practicing, but my second one, I'm getting it right for the most part. And I think about, what you're saying with regard to money, because I'm in a much better place financially in this marriage than I was in my first marriage. And I think about, I don't remember the stuff that was given to me. I remember the stuff that we did together. And one of the things is, that I personally find with material possessions is that, that newness wears off, the luster is gone, and you could put it on and go, yeah, but then it just, after a while, that experience of receipt of said item wears off. But when I think about some of the adventures that my husband and I have been on and some of the crazy stories that have come out of those adventures, I think every time I tell the story to somebody who hasn't heard it, and it just, the story builds and it creates momentum over time, as opposed to the glitz or sparkle of some of those other items that have lost their luster. And so I'm excited that you're a big proponent of the experiential type of stuff when it comes to spending money.
I absolutely am, and it's something that we've seen, just proven over and over again that people come back and it's like you said, they don't tell stories about the new car, or the bling. They might show it off for a little bit, but it's kind of like that Christmas toy, that was really cool during Christmas, and by the 26th, 27th, the kids are over it.
Well, I broke it by New Year's.
Yeah, exactly. Versus experiences, which you keep in pictures and in memory and in really fun stories. And what you said and the example you gave is case in point. I would say the other thing that I want to mention on the don't side would be secrets. And I've got a lot of folks who've been married a couple times, and almost unequivocally, one of the reasons the marriage didn't work the first time around was there were secrets that came back to haunt them.
Financial infidelity.
There it is. Don't hide all that debt you got. It's going to come out sooner or later.
Yes.
Marriage is a contract, and if you marry someone with high debts, guess what? You're liable for it. So got to be sure you know what you're getting into. So
that you just brought up a great point. So let me ask this question. So I know we're on the do-don't list, but let's just say, without our wisdom, let's say we're back in our 20s again, and we're experiencing a very loving, caring relationship, and we're contemplating uniting for the rest of our lives. What are some of the things that we can do preemptively as we establish this relationship and explore whether or not we want to go to that marriage point? We'll talk about our sex lives and our past partners faster than we will talk about our financial endeavors. So how do we start that conversation?
Yeah, well, that goes back to our initial point, and kind of the first thing you and I talk about, which is communication. And what I tell clients that are thinking about getting engaged is to talk about it and talk about hey, we'll kind of do a what if. So if we were together, if we decided that we want to make this official, what's the split? Which one of us is better at what? And so you really talk about splitting the financial responsibilities. So, traditionally, if we're going back to the 50s and 60s, women would manage the day-to-day finances, like balancing the checkbook, whereas men would deal with the investments and financial planning. I'll be the first to tell you those traditions are, out the window. They no longer apply. Mm-hmm. So the best option here is really to recognize, who's better at the individual job and split up those financial tasks. And you have to talk about that. You have to know the value of your partner. You have to know, hey, this one, I've got a client whose, wife is an accountant. So obviously she's very good with numbers. She's the best one to balance the books, etc. He's a good stock picker. He likes to research and that sort of thing. So he handles, the individual stocks that they have.
But not because it's gender-based. It's because it's skill-based.
Correct. Exactly. And I mean, listen, having money can be enjoyable, certainly, but you want to enjoy it with your spouse, and certainly enjoying it with your spouse is heightened by the fact that each of the partners is really doing the job that they're best at. And, before you are a couple, at least legally speaking, you want to be sure that both of you is on the same page in that respect for sure.
Yeah. So what happens, so let's just create a scenario here. And neither of us are attorneys, nor do we play them on TV, but we do have an inkling of what happens. So let's say, for example, you and I were in love and we want to get married, and I haven't told you about the $40,000 worth of student loans that I incurred long before your watch. So what happens if I have credit card debt, I'm a little spendy, you're the little savvy, and we get married? What happens to all of that debt that I have? Are you now responsible for it? Or, in the team effort sense, I guess you are. But what happens?
Sure. Well, the studies are showing now that it's 76% of all Americans admit that what you just said, having one of them with higher debt or coming into a marriage with a lot of revolving debt is the number one source of stress in their lives. So if you do get married and that debt, comes into play, and again, neither of us are attorneys, so we're giving you our opinion, but, marriage is a contract, and if you marry someone with high debts, for example, and they, pass away or they decide that they don't want to pay them, well, guess what? You get called. You get called and you have to become liable for that repayment. I can tell you on a personal note, our big one, about 2 years into my marriage, they offered a big debt consolidation for your college loans. And my wife and I both had college loans, and they said, well, you can do this consolidation because you and your wife are paying separately. And I'll never forget this phone call. This kid that they got on the phone, he does the research, and he goes, well, Mr. Dukes, I can do this for you, but I just want to be sure we're clear. And I said, okay. He goes, well, I said, why? That's an odd question. And then he says to me, he goes, do you love your wife? And I said, wow, this just went somewhere odd. I said, I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to ask why you're asking me that. He said, well, he goes, I just brought up what you owe. You have about $1,000 that you owe on your balance of your loan. And I just brought up your wife's loan, and she has a $44,000 balance on her loan.
How much do you
And
love her?
by combining... Yes, and you let me know, by combining these two, Mr. Dukes, you will now be liable for the entire $45,000. So I want to ask you, sir, is this... And, for this kid on the phone to say, I just want to make sure you love your wife, was a sort of a poignant statement on the day. And we did end up combining it, and we paid it off in big chunks, thank God. But
what a good man you are. You really did love her.
We're 16 years later, we're still rolling along.
High five on that one. That's awesome. What a great story. Commingling of debt is that's a commitment in and of itself. Forget the marriage contract.
You could do a whole show on that.
I know, we could.
Right. Well, it's and then you got to talk about, and the biggest one I've had besides the debt is just the monies. You mentioned a second ago about, hey, if we're going to get together, what about debt? Well, how about the people that are, and this is sort of another big one, the people that have just been used to taking care of their own finances for so long, and then, suddenly we're going to get together. Does that mean we have to have a joint account? Do we have to suddenly, close our own? And, it really depends on personalities. I can tell you a lot of my clients still have separate accounts. Mom still has her own account. Dad still has his own account where, they know what they're putting in there and they know what they're taking out. And, you can still see it online and you can still see it, with all your other accounts together. But I've got, I would say easily 50% of my clients that, they will have a joint account for maybe some bills and things, but ultimately they keep individual accounts just so they can, track their own money.
Well, and I, being a repeat marriage partner, because one was not enough, that I believe that yours, mine, and ours isn't a bad thing. Yeah. I think that that's okay, because what happens, especially, and I notice this in relationships where one person has more money than the other person, and it becomes a what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine situation. Yeah. And that can't be good for either party. And so I think that gives a level of satisfaction that, yes, we're participating in things together, but you still are your own person and I'm still my own person. We do come together. And I think that that's healthier, especially if folks, because we're marrying so much later, with life expectancies pushing the envelope. I think that we're experiencing life on our own and becoming our own people. And when we become our own people and we've done things the same way for so many years, it's a behavior that's difficult to overcome, like you were talking about earlier with regard to the whole saving and hoarding kind of thing mentality from the boomer generation. And
yeah, absolutely. And it's, I can tell you, my wife and I both have, separate accounts. I've got my own little pocket change account, and she's got a separate account, just in her name. And, we've got a joint account as well. And, it's what works for us. The joint account, I have to check and see what things have cleared, and that's what we use for sort of bills and things. And then I have spending account for my business, et cetera. And she's got one that she uses for the kids. And ultimately it works, for us and what we're doing, because she knows the balance. She knows the balances in her account, and I know the balances in my account, and I never have to worry about making that phone call or that text where I say, I'm $300 overdrawn. How did that happen? So,
is there a transaction I'm missing and not accounting for? Yeah, that's not a good phone call.
Exactly.
Well, if folks want to learn how to manage their money more effectively and seek out your wisdom and advice, where can folks find you, Christopher?
Yes, they can go online. The website is www.dukesfinancial, all one word, DUKES financial.com. You'll see our lovely photo on there of the staff, and then you'll get to see the seminar schedule for the rest of 2016. We are licensed in many states across the country, so you don't actually have to live here in California. Wherever you live, we can certainly help you. We always do complimentary consultations, so when you call us, we don't charge for those services, and if we can help you, we'll certainly try.
Outstanding. Well, thanks again for stopping by Unlock Your Wealth Radio and spreading your wisdom. And for those of you who are driving around without a pencil, never fear. UnlockYourWealthRadio.com is here, where you can visit Christopher's show page, get the links to his website, phone numbers, and so much more. And I would encourage you to take his seminars. He's an amazing person, and let him know that Unlock Your Wealth Radio sent you. Now, thanks so much for stopping by. And for the maestro of Moolah, Michael Terry, I'm Heather Wagenhals. Now go out and unlock your wealth today.
UnlockYourWealthRadio.com is produced by Heather Wagenhals and the Unlock Your Wealth Foundation. UnlockYourWealthRadio.com and its affiliates are copyrighted 2016 with all rights reserved. For more information on the Keys to Riches Financial Wellness Series, please visit our website at www.unlockyourwealth.com.
Stress all night, take your mind off your money and focus on your